Hi, I'm Nikki Roach, host of the podcast formerly known as Let's Talk WEM. Yes, the exciting news is that after 2 really successful seasons, our not-so-little podcast is growing, becoming a bit more ambitious and getting a new name. We're a CIWEM podcast, and that's the Chartered Institution of Water and Environmental Management. But as we engage with listeners way beyond the industry who are interested in building a more resilient world, we wanted a name that looked a bit further outwards and summed up what we were really trying to achieve with this podcast. We're looking for answers and ways forward in water and environmental management that can benefit the globe as a whole. And we want to share the conversations that will enable the experts that CIWEM represents and people around the world to work together in positive and realistic ways and focus on what's possible for our planet. And so that's a clue for the new name for Let's Talk WEM, the podcast that will now be called Planet Possible. Don't worry, the pod you know and love is staying the same. I'm still here and we'll still be having progressive and positive conversations with people who can make a difference as the world faces real challenges managing its water, environment and climate. Planet Possible will be back for Series 3 in a few weeks, but until then, we're going to celebrate our new name with a few short audio specials. Coming up over the next few weeks as we build up to the full launch of Planet Possible, I'll be talking to CIWEM's Director of Policy, Al Chisholm, to look back on what's changed in the industry and on the planet since our first episode in December 2020. We'll be looking back at what previous pod guests would like to do if they could wave a magic wand. And you can hear the views from our sector as we hear from a diverse range of industry professionals on what they think is possible in the next 10 years. First up, I want to share a story with you that's all about how change can happen. February is LGBT+ History Month, and CIWEM member Mike Wheeler shared with us his reflections on what's changed in the last 50 years. It's powerful stuff. Here's Mike's story.
I don't quite know how it happened, but to misquote the great Quentin Crisp, who famously wrote The Naked Civil Servant, it seems I have become one of England's grand old stately homos, at least that is within the WEM sector. And it is perhaps on that basis that I have been asked to speak to you about my own experiences and reflect on the changes I have seen in my life during the 50 years since the setting up of Stonewall in the UK. I'm a senior water engineer at the Canal River Trust. The Trust has a Rainbow Ally scheme to which I am signed up. And the scheme is set up to address issues of gender, of race, of disability and of sexuality. Now, I understand all of that, and I shall always do my best to call out inequality or bullying, banter, and so on, should I come across it. But my main reason for signing up is because I want to be a positive role model for younger colleagues who may be struggling with coming out. I want to say to them, it's okay, you can be yourself. Look at me, it's okay, it's all turned out fine. But you know, my story is not in any way unusual. Many of you, I am sure, will recognize and relate to my own experiences. That's the whole point. We are not alone, and many of our experiences will be the same. So, 50 years ago, it was 1972, I was a frightened little 12-year-old in my second year at a boys' public school in Warwick in the Midlands. It wasn't long before puberty hit me like a steam train, and I fell totally and completely in love with my best friend at school. And our friendship developed into a rather fumbling and frankly confusing exploration of love and friendship. To me, it was wonderful and the most natural thing in the world. But then I noticed people around me beginning to notice. The teasing started. I started to realize I didn't fit into this testosterone-fueled world around me. I realized I had to keep my thoughts and feelings to myself. At 16, I really wanted to join the RAF, but instinctively, I knew that that was never going to work. At that time, and remember, this was the 1970s, the only gay role models I remember were Larry Grayson on The Generation Game, or John Humphreys in Are You Being Served, or Danny LaRue, the female impersonator. These were very camp and comedic characters. There's nothing wrong with that, but I just couldn't identify with that. I didn't want to be laughed at. I didn't fit in. I retreated into my closet and I firmly locked the door, hiding my feelings. And as I got into my later teens, I started to get into trouble. Nothing serious, but I see now I was pushing back. I dropped out of A-levels. I tried a couple of false start career paths, trying to figure out my life and where I fitted in. And so it was, at 18, I had begun adult life living a lie, going along with the banter and the jokes, disappointing and hurting girls in my life, trying to be someone I was not. I thought, I hoped it was an adolescent phase that would pass, but it wasn't passing. I tried a brief foray into the embryonic gay scene in Coventry and Birmingham. Some of you may have heard of the Nightingale nightclub in Birmingham. In those days, it had one gay night in the week, Tuesday, I think. And there was one pub in Coventry called the Rose and Crown, known for its gay clientele. But again, I just felt I didn't fit in, and I retreated even further into that closet of mine. In 1982, I travelled in India for 6 months, following the hippie trail and trying to find myself. I came back to a small town, but with a renewed energy. This was in the early 1980s. It was the time of punk and the new romantics and of anti-establishment feelings. Gay people were starting to speak out and becoming more visible. Very slowly, I started to peek out of that closet. I told just a very few close friends who it felt safe to tell. And then came my lucky break. I got a job in London. I left the small town and I moved to the big city on March 13th, 1984. I'm sure that it was in that year that I stumbled across what must have been one of the very early gay pride marches. It consisted of a small group of rather forlorn-looking people marching slowly together around Leicester Square and carrying banners. I wanted to join them, but I was standing watching with my mother and my brother who were visiting, and I was still very closeted. I bought copies of Time Out magazine, which had a gay section with club listings and Lonely Hearts ads, and I tentatively started to explore the London gay scene. One night, I bumped into a work colleague at Heaven nightclub, and we became friends, and he showed me around the scene, which he certainly knew very well. But still, I couldn't come out at work. I couldn't tell my straight friends, and I couldn't tell my family. It was at this time that we started to become aware of HIV and AIDS. I think for me, that was the start of my coming out. A friend from school, who I was best man at his wedding, and who with his wife was living in London, and who still thought that I was straight, he said to me, standing in a pub one night, that he thought gay men deserved to die of AIDS because they were all so promiscuous. I don't know where he got that line from, the Sun newspaper probably, but a lot of people were thinking the same around that time. I was so upset and angry that I came out to him there and then, asking him if he thought that I deserved to die. Now, there is a happy ending to that story. He's fine with it, and I have changed his opinion somewhat. Then my mother read something I had written, and she reacted very badly. But you know, to be fair to her, it was a shock. She'd had no time to come to terms with it, whereas I had been coming to terms with my sexuality for years. I still was. So moving on, it was 1988, and Margaret Thatcher's government brought in that disgusting piece of legislation, the infamous Clause 28. It prohibited local authorities, and therefore schools, from promoting homosexuality. And I remember thinking, if only I had had access to books in our school library, like those of Edmund White, whose stories for adolescents had gay characters. Or if I'd had teachers I could talk to, how much different would my life have been? In 1990, the political activist group Outrage emerged. They organised in-your-face events like the Gay Kiss-In. They were actively outing gay MPs who had voted for Clause 28. The gay community was getting bigger, louder, and stronger. About that time, Ken Livingstone's Greater London Council created the London Lesbian and Gay Centre. And I joined a befriending group there, and I met lots of new gay friends. I started to go out on the London Gay Pride marches. These had started out as quite small affairs, but grew into huge marches with pride festivals in parks around London each year. And the message was quite political. My favourite chant was, "We're here, we're queer, and we're not going shopping." Another big change in the early 90s was the club scene. There was definitely a huge cultural shift in the 90s. For instance, straight women realised that gay clubs were better. The music was great, they weren't getting hassled by lager-filled straight guys, and quite frankly, the men were much better looking. And the rave scene saw people loved up, and gender and sexuality boundaries seemed to come down. But sadly, while all this was going on, AIDS was killing a lot of people around the world. I had lost a couple of friends to AIDS, and I met people who had lost partners to AIDS but had no next of kin rights. One night I was in a pub, and I remember a man telling me how his boyfriend had been buried that day, but whose family had refused to let him attend the funeral, even though it was he who had nursed his boyfriend throughout until he went into hospital. It was just terrible. So during this time, slowly, I began to think, I'm not having this anymore. I'm not going to let anyone make me feel second best anymore. This is me. And if they don't like it, I just do not give a damn. And eventually, I kicked open the doors to that closet of mine. And you know what? It has all been fine. Okay, yes, there have been a few bigots in jobs that I've had to deal with. But for the most part, it has all been fine. By 1995, I was living on a narrowboat in Little Venice. My nickname among the small boating community there was Happy Mike. Firstly, because I was genuinely out, proud and happy for the first time. And secondly, because they thought it politically incorrect to call me Gay Mike. So fair enough. In 1996, I started working for British Waterways, that in 2012 became the Canal and River Trust. I found myself in a really safe working environment where, apart from a very few exceptions, my being gay has never been an issue. In 2002, I met my partner, Fernando. He is from Venezuela and was working and studying here on a student visa. We both wanted him to make his home here with me, but as a same-sex couple, to get his UK residency, we had to show proof that we were living as would a straight married couple. Holiday photos, joint bank account, and that sort of thing. Ken Livingstone was by then Mayor of London and had brought about something called a commitment ceremony and certificate, whereby same-sex couples could announce their commitment to one another. And so we had a proud commitment ceremony at London City Hall. Now, this certificate had no legal standing, but it supported an expensive and lengthy application to the Home Office. And we were even more proud when, 5 years after we met, Fernando was given UK citizenship at Islington Town Hall, here in Islington, where we live. It meant now that Fernando could stay with me in this country. It was 2004 that civil partnerships were finally introduced into law for same-sex couples. And in July last year, at the same Islington Town Hall, Fernando and I were married. Well, actually, it was a civil partnership, but I'm finding that that's much more of a mouthful to say. Oh, and by the way, my mum was one of the witnesses who signed the register. I can tell you it was a very wonderful and a very emotional day. So there we have it. 50 years of my life have gone by, seemingly incredibly quickly, and the world is without doubt a very different place. We started out with LGBT, and then we added Q and A and plus, and that has to be good. It's true, we have come a long way, but there is still a way to go. Over the years since I came out, I have had 7 work colleagues come out to me, some recently, and all have been struggling with telling work colleagues and their straight friends. We need to get to a place where everyone feels they can be themselves, without prejudice, without bigotry, in a safe environment. And I guess this is part of that effort. And I must tell you, that really does make me feel proud. So that's me, Happy Mike, the grand old stately homo, 61 and still going strong. And I thank you all for listening.
Thank you to Mike Wheeler for sharing his story. Mike's experiences show that change is possible, progress can be made, and the world can become a very different place over the course of a few decades. I'm delighted that Mike shared his story through one of our WEM Pride events, and if you'd like to find out more about the WEM Pride group, head to the CIWEM website. That was the first of 4 short audio specials we're putting out to build up to Season 3 of the pod. The pod, previously called Let's Talk WEM until this point, will now be called Planet Possible, and we're using our new name as a launching pad for stories, discussion and insight over the coming weeks. In our next audio special, I'll be joined by CIWEM's Director of Policy, Al Chisholm, and we look back on what's happened since we launched the pod in 2020 and what lies ahead for our industry in the near future. So keep an eye out for that. But for now, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.
Planet Possible is produced by Bulb. BWLB Bulb. The best ideas, the strongest content.